Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on the show. I'm joined by Dr. Sherrie Johnson. Now, I've met with her through my connections at George Mason, just connecting and collaborating. And ironically, she is a guru in communication, which, lo and behold, fast forward, through the pandemic and whatnot, I'm actually getting my doctorate in communication. So this is kind of crazy, and it's kind of aligned, and her expertise is very, very needed in this time and era. Additionally, she is in her role with communication. She's also a coach and content creator, and really supporting those that want to effectively communicate as a leader. And she has a series, focusing on authentic leadership and communication as a leader. And I jump in every now and then when she goes live or does, webinars for free, which I think is a great service just to take notes. I've actually joined a few times and taken notes, but that's enough for her intro. I want to actually give her an opportunity to introduce herself to the listeners.
Hi, well, Phil, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yes, you nailed it. My name is Dr. Sherrie Johnson. I have a company called Sherrie Johnson Communications, LLC, and I am an authentic leadership speaker, communications coach, and I also have some online courses as well. And, basically, as you mentioned, I spent like 20 years in journalism as an anchor and reporter. And then I moved over, changed careers, and went into public relations and communications, and moved into executive management, leading communication teams. And so I went back to school, got my master's in communications, went back to school again, and got my doctorate in organizational leadership. And I studied authentic leadership. And, I successfully defended my dissertation. And you know what? When I left, I said, this is important information that, everyone needs to know. So I reworked my dissertation and published a book, Authentic Leadership in the Workplace, doing quite well on Amazon. And, because I wanted to get information about positive leadership styles out into the community. And authentic leadership was created in 2003. And it's one of the newer leadership styles that's out there. You have some like transformational leadership that's been out, for many, many years. In fact, when I first was trying to get my dissertation approved, you have to get your research topic approved. I suggested transformational leadership, and the professor said, nope, overdone, try something else. And so that's when I continued to do research. And I found that more and more employees were succumbing to mental illnesses due to working in toxic work environments. And so I found a need for more positive leadership styles in the workplace. And that's when I found authentic leadership. Authentic leadership is a positive leadership style. And and that is how I began to write my dissertation, because we found a need to find more positive leadership styles for the workplace in order for employees to succeed and be successful.
I love it. And one of the things I thought about is I actually took a learning course at George Mason called Positive Leadership, which I feel aligns. And, some of the pillars that I remember was, leading with purpose, strength space, leading a team with their strengths, mindfulness. And there was like 4 core. I think it was purpose, mindfulness, strengths based, and then also just being kind, not and being rude. So does that really closely align with authentic leadership? Like if positive leadership has those 4 pillars, how closely aligned is authentic leadership to that kind of modality?
It is very closely aligned. It really is. An authentic leader is someone that is open, honest, trustworthy, and communicates well with employees. And there's actually four components of that. There's internal moral perspective, there's
Mhm.
balance processing, self-awareness, and relational transparency. Those four components make up the authentic leadership theory. And you're absolutely right. Authentic leadership is one of the positive leadership styles. And it has been proven that this type of leadership style promotes positivity in the workforce and improves staff performance.
Yeah, so I see like the Venn diagram of that is very,
Mhm.
I think there's all these different things, right? We could say, transformational leader, which probably still is there, your leadership that's still there, positive leadership. And I think there's not one size fit all. You kind of take aspects of each and kind of,
Situational leadership,
you
that's
know,
right, sometimes
be
because
like your own
employees
leader.
are different. You're right, employees are different. So sometimes what may work for one employee may not work for another employee. So sometimes you have to use situational leadership and apply
Mhm.
different things for different people to be successful. But, basically, the core things that are important is honesty, openness, and making sure you communicate with your staff. They don't know your expectations unless you communicate to them, and they
Mhm.
need that communication in order to be successful. So, communicating with your staff is very important, and positive communication is part of the authentic leadership theory. But it is important, to for an employee to respect their leader. Okay. So if
Mhm.
you have these attributes such as honesty, okay, openness, transparency, these are characteristics and traits that employees respect. And when the research shows that when they respect a leader, then they will perform better in the workplace.
And I love it. I love the difference between respect and fear, right? Like you do not need to fear someone to respect them. You kind of like almost know their standards, know what they stand about, know their non-negotiables and their values,
Mhm.
know their lines and boundaries, but also you're not in fear. Like you can actually go. Like I love the word open, right? Like even if someone is respected, they're still open to feedback.
Mhm.
They're still open to dialogue.
Mhm.
uh, there's a difference. There's clearly a difference. What is your difference between a respected leader and a feared leader?
Well, it is the research shows that it is better to have their respect. Employees will go the extra mile, they will work harder, and they will perform better when they respect the leader, not necessarily so much when they fear the leader. Because, one thing too is you want to prevent turnover and you want to increase retention. So if you're leading with fear, that's not going to help. That's not going to help at all. That's going to make them run for the door even faster. But if they respect the leader, that's going to make them stay around. And, I can give you an example. Like I said, I conducted research. That means I interviewed employees across the country in my research. Um, and I actually spoke to employees about leaders. And, I have an example of, during COVID, one organization called their employees in, had a meeting because we had to, businesses had to close down. They were in the red, so they, had to have some furloughs and layoffs and things of that nature. Well, the employees said they really respected the organization because they were upfront, honest, came to them with the information as soon as possible, and they respected that. And so there were some furloughs, but then later, when they were able to come back, those employees were running to come back because they wanted to work for that type of organization that put them first, and they had families to feed. And so that information helped them to make good decisions. And they respected that. They respected how the company handled that situation. And many of them, even after the furloughs, returned back and are still there and very happy. So a lot of times it's how the leadership treats the employees. And if they are open, honest, and transparent, employees respect that and they want to work for those type of organizations and they work harder.
I love it. I just think about those mindsets like where I would run through a brick wall for someone. Like, if you respect your leader and there's like a football coach and he tells you to do something, you just you they could be no nonsense tough on you, but then you're like, but they actually cared about me or they made us play better. But it's like the respect slash it wasn't fear, right? And then you can see the line tip over. And I loved it. So, like, as you were doing your research and coming to these four pillars of open, honest, trustworthy, and communication, I'm going to go with a star. Did you gravitate naturally to the communication and learn the other ones later on, or did you just say, "Oh, I came across all these different pillars evenly"?
Yeah, I came across all of them evenly, but I have to say when I saw communication, I smiled, because, that one is a no-brainer for me. That my background is in
Mhm.
communication, and it made that one made perfect sense. I didn't have to spend a lot of time on that area because that's something that, I already knew. Yes, communication is important. How is an employee supposed to understand or know expectation if you don't communicate with them? And it's very interesting because I talked about, in the book, some of the ways that employers and leaders can communicate with their staff, and that's a community newsletter.
Mhm.
That's a internal newsletter for your employees, and then also intranet. A portal on the website just for employees, a designated spot where they can go and get information. Also talked about or email blasts. Just keeping your employees informed, one-on-one meetings, bi-monthly or monthly staff meetings, just a place where you can inform them on what is going on with the company. And even though some people may say, huh, that's a no-brainer. No, you would be very surprised
Mhm.
at the number of employees that I spoke to that do not receive this, none of it, not
Okay.
meeting check-ins, not staff meetings, not a newsletter, nothing. They hear nothing, radio silence. And I've had a number of leaders reach out to me. I do consultations and I consult with leaders um, that need assistance in the communication area. They could be a strong leader, but not so strong in how to communicate. And it's not as easy as it sounds, and it's not as easy as it may look. And so there's a process to it. And so I do work with many leaders on that process in making sure they are effectively communicating with their staff. And so, but it was surprising to me the number of employees that I spoke to and that I interviewed during my research that received their biggest complaint was they received no um, communication from their leaders. There was no internal communication. I know one person gave me an example of, during the George Floyd
Mhm.
murder, and their organization wrote a statement and sent the statement to the media. And they saw the statement on the news, on the 6 o'clock news, but they received nothing from their employer. So it was frustrating to them to see it on the news, but yet they had not been communicated with. But it was great to see how their organization felt on the matters of race, and they were proud of the stance that their organization took, but they could have told employees first and then sent it to the news media. So it is important to communicate internally, especially before you communicate externally.
I love that. I was actually thinking about that. My next question, because I have like two questions, but my next question is then, what about the oversaturation? Like
Mm,
I'm in college now. I'm getting my PhD.
mhm.
We are very internally communicated with that. Sometimes it gets lost in the sauce. Like it's too much. So what is that balance about?
That is a very good point.
Oversaturated communication.
That is a very good point. But you know what I would say, Phil? First off, kudos to your folks because it's better to have too much rather than too little or none at
Mhm.
all. So that's a good problem to have. And that's not a problem that a lot of people have. So that's a good thing. It's better to have too much than too little. But I don't know if yours has surveys or a place where you can, give your opinion. But I would let them know, hey, this is a bit too much. I know with some communication teams that I've worked with, we send out surveys yearly and we ask people what's the best way for us to get information to you. What do you think about the information you're receiving? And we ask them too little, too much, and to get a pulse, just to get a pulse
Mhm.
on things. And so I don't know if there's a feedback channel to where you could write in and let them know, hey, just a little bit too much, or reach out to the folks in the communications arena directly and just let them know. I'm sure they would love to hear that information. And what type of things do you feel are too much? But yes, surveys each year are really good. That way you make sure people are not tuning you out, because the bad part about that is if it is too much, then people are going to tune you out. And then when you really have something important to share with them, they're not going to be around listening. They're going to tune it out, and they're not going to open it. And then that does become a problem. So it's a delicate dance. And no one ever said communications was easy. It's a very delicate dance. And you do want to make sure you're informing people, but not too much to where they're ignoring your communication that's going out. But yeah, I would definitely say if there's a, a, a box or something, or where you could email your opinion or give your opinion, definitely let them know that, because that is important, because you don't want people tuning you out. And then when you have something important to say, they're not there to receive the information.
I love it. And I actually, specifically subscribe to a lot of newsletters across campus because there's things that you might get in one newsletter that you don't get in another thing. And so
Mhm.
I think it's good. And then I just learned, I think I have like an email process where I'm able to skim real first. And then if I
Mhm.
need it, I use it. If not, I delete. So I kind of build a system. But then that
Mhm.
kind of goes into that one where I think it's actually tricky in regards to leadership when it's multiple systems in one. And so, for instance, a university that I work at, it literally is like a mini town with different little mini towns within it that everyone has different channels. And there's been often where someone's like, "Oh, did you hear about that? No, I didn't hear about that. Did you hear about that?" And I mean, it's just a lot. It's a lot going on, and so things get. Not everyone knows everything across the campus, and I think that's just a normal life thing. And I think that's even if you get larger to any system, like a state has their news, but they
Mhm.
don't know what's going on around the whole country, right? Like, so
Yes.
how do you deal with authentic leadership in regards to the different fluctuating of scales? Like,
So
you
one
yeah.
thing that we have found that works and is a good idea and very useful is developing a communications liaison
Mhm,
group. And so you're right, you have different things going on across the campus, okay, and everybody's in their own little world. But perhaps maybe someone from the university communications team could develop a system, okay, system thinking, develop a system to where they have one communication liaison in every department, and you meet monthly or you meet bi-monthly, and you come to the table and let folks know what it is you're doing, okay?
mhm,
And then that way everyone's on the same page, and then when they're sending out information, we know what each other is doing. We're on the same sheet of music. We're working as one, instead of people being in silos doing their own different thing and people not knowing what they're. But communications liaisons, those types of groups, one representative from each part of the university meeting, coming together, sharing ideas, letting each other know what they're doing. And this is also helpful in putting those newsletters together as well, so that you're not stepping on each other's toes and everybody
mhm,
knows what they're doing. But that has proven to be quite helpful. And that's a very useful tool, those communication liaisons, because a lot of times you don't know what's going on in each
mhm.
department, but your communication liaison is responsible for getting that information and bringing it to the table. And then that way, and then meeting bi-monthly with other communication liaisons from across the university, sharing information. Well, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing. We're going to put this out. We're going to put that out. And then everybody is on the same page.
I love it. I think I think
Mhm.
it's ambassadorship, and I think it's, obviously I love the word stepping on each other's toes or like, wait,
Mhm.
what? You're not missing it. And I think that's what's needed when it's scalable, right? Like I
Mhm.
think as things get bigger and
Mhm.
leader, obviously with your communication style, good leaders will bring new people. So there's obviously going to be an opportunity for growth. So I think that sometimes that changes, right? It's so much easier to tell a small team of 4, but then you got a team of 8 and a team of 10. And then before you know it, you have 2 different teams of 10 and it just keeps on growing like that. So I think it changes.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why it's important to have system thinking and think as a system, because that helps in the long run, especially the larger the team becomes.
What is your go-to community? Like we all have preferences. I think
Mhm,
I love public speaking.
mhm.
People like writing. What is your personal preference in regards to communication?
Oh, you know what? I like speaking. If you know, if you haven't noticed, I like the gift of gab. But so,
Yeah,
I enjoy speaking, and I'm really enjoying getting out and speaking about authentic leadership. I have spoken with the Society for Human Resources Management (SHRM), spoken with those, and the Association for Talent Development. I have flown out to California on some speaking tours out there, just speaking to leaders, CEOs, and letting them know about authentic leadership and what it looks like in the workplace. And also going on book tours this summer when I launched my book, and talking to different organizations and groups, small groups. So I really enjoy speaking, but as a former journalist, I also love writing too. I also love writing, and so hence writing the book, and already looking to my second book, starting to get work on that as well. Still on leadership, but also putting more information out there. So yeah, enjoy speaking, enjoy public speaking. It's so much fun to connect with the audiences, especially in the small groups where we can interact and we can talk about scenarios. And I love getting audience feedback and hearing their take on things. I may give them a scenario, and they may give information back, something I hadn't even thought of. I was like, oh, that's a great point. So I love feeding off that energy. So enjoy public speaking, but I do also love writing. So it's really a hard toss
yeah.
up.
No, I was actually like, as I've learned, I never thought of myself as a good writer or whatever, and I've actually started to enjoy writing,
Mhm,
and I enjoy actually also sharing writing. I feel like there's a permanence to it, right? Like
mhm,
I can talk right now on a podcast, but I feel like when you put something on paper, or like aspirations, where I have mad kudos for you to have a book, that's something that's like generational, right? Like you think of books, and whether you're, long when you're long gone off this earth, you have something tangible that's like forever, a book. So I've gravitated to that, and said that there's no excuse. If you think you have confidence as a writer, or
mhm.
you have confidence as a speaker, try to work on both to have both of those. Don't be so single focused on your communication.
Absolutely. That you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. I enjoy speaking, but I also enjoy writing. And, it's wonderful that when I do go on speaking tours, I can, also autograph and sell my book at the end, and I'm able to talk to audiences and talk to them a little bit about the book. So they go hand in hand. They really do. And I enjoy it. I enjoy getting out, meeting people, and I'm glad that I still have some webinars, but I'm glad that more and more in person bookings are starting to come back. So that's really exciting. So especially this summer, really getting booked this summer for a lot already things. So I'm excited to be back in person, and then that way you can feed off the audience. But I really enjoy telling people about authentic leadership, also talking to people about best practices for communications, because it is so important for leaders, to communicate well to their staff and to put those positive leadership styles into the workplace, because you do have some employees that suffer at the hands of malicious leaders and gaslighting. And so it is important that we promote and get the information out about the reason for positive leadership styles and the positive effect it has on employees. And also important to mention DEI,
Ah,
diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is so important. When you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it starts with the leader, top down. And so it's important for people to see their leaders hiring diverse groups of people on their leadership team. And then that way, when your managers and supervisors, when they go to hire for their teams, they're watching that leader, and they'll also have diversity in their hiring practice. But, again, the leader sets the tone, the leader sets an example, and your employees and your staff follow that example. And so it is so important to set a good example, a positive example, one that others in the organization can follow and be successful.
I love it. Actually, I was smiling because I literally was about to go talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and
Mhm.
belonging. If you want to add belonging to that, next. And I think my next question is, you brought up earlier about statements, and
Mhm.
I think you spoke very on like during the height of the pandemic. There was a lot of wave about corporations putting out statements and
Mhm.
slapping Black Lives Matter on their products and things. And I think we're starting to see that tail down a little bit, where I think the statements, are starting to be less and less because, and now it's appearing that some of those statements were a little bit performative. So, and I love the word authentic. So, what are some of these best practices where now, live it and speak it in regards to this initiative of diversity, equity, inclusion? I think we're past the popularization of it, where you need to be very authentic in these practices. How does that, resonate with you?
Oh, you hit the nail on the head. That is important. It's important to be consistent. You're right. It's important to be authentic, and it's important to be consistent. So, you have to figure out what your organization stands for and continue to consistently get that messaging out. And it's also important to show your staff what the organization stands for. And by putting those statements out, they know where you're coming from. Okay, and so it is important to be consistent. And that is one of the problems is, people will do this at some point when they think that's a hot button issue, or, and then later peter out, and then they're not doing it anymore. So it is important to be consistent. If you started doing that to begin with, you need to keep doing that all the way through and be consistent. If that's part of your mission statement or the organization's vision and values, then you have to be consistent with that. And many people were beginning to put DEI in their mission and vision statement. So again, you have to be consistent. If you start it, you got to continue. You can't stop, because again, employees are watching, and it goes back to that respect factor. Okay, they see this happening. Okay, they didn't really mean it to begin with, because we're not doing it anymore. So again, got to stay consistent. If you got to keep doing it, because that's your mission, that's your vision, that's what you believe. The leadership sets the tone. So yeah, I think consistency is key. But you're right, in some cases it has fallen off. But we need to pick it back up, and it needs to be consistent, a consistent message throughout.
Now, what is I always think about scenarios, and who was someone when you wrote this book and you wanted to dedicate this book to him? You're like, all these four pillars, you really did that for me, and you let them know years later they had no idea that they were an authentic leader. They just was just being a nice person. Did you have anyone like that? You surprised them later and was like, when I thought about these pillars, you came to my mind, and they were really honored or something.
Well, you know what? Actually, when I dedicated the book, I dedicated it to my family because they were so supportive on my doctoral journey. But when you ask the question that way, I honestly didn't think about one of my managers. I honestly did. I didn't even think about one of my leaders. I really didn't. I just had this focus on trying to, oh, I found this information and I found this research, and oh, I want to share what I've learned. And that's really what went through my mind is I've got to share what I've just learned. I want other people to know about this. So that's really what went through my mind. But since you asked that question, this is the first time I'm thinking about this. I was a cub reporter, and I had a wonderful news director, and he was, and if I'm looking at it honestly, he was an authentic leader, and he was the best leader that I had. And he's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago, but he was the best leader that I had when I'm looking at it right now. But when I put the book out, I wasn't thinking about that. But yes, I have had a few good leaders in my time. But yeah, he was one of the best.
As I went through your pillars too, and I'll definitely need to get a copy of your book. I'm thinking of someone in my mind that probably was just being their normal self and just a good person, but they checked every single one of these boxes. And so I'm like, I definitely want to send this episode later to them and say, hey, you. I think there's a few. I have a list of people that I'm like, wow, they really hit every single one of these boxes for
That's
me,
great.
and I'll send it to them. But I think a lot of times, and I think that's another part. Some people are particularly needed that coaching, right? And I think they need coaching and other ones. And then I think there's people that just naturally do it and they don't think it's a big deal. Like they just I don't know, they're just
That's
innately
just who they are.
just
Exactly.
who
You're
they are,
absolutely right. Yeah.
and they
And
wake up
that's
one
great.
day, and people call them leader, and they're like, "Oh, I was just living my life. I was trying to help." So do you think there's an innate across all these a servant leadership aspect to it? Like if you want to be an open, honest, trustworthy, and communicative leader, you're just trying to do it to help others. It's definitely a to me, there's a service aspect. But what about how does that resonate with you?
Well, actually, like I said, authentic leadership came around in 2003. So, it actually came from transformational leadership and ethical leadership.
Hmm.
So it actually derived from those two and to create authentic leadership. So it actually comes from transformational leadership and ethical leadership. So yes, I do think that yeah, there's a part of it in those. A part of it, yeah, can be considered servant leadership as well. So yeah, exactly, you are absolutely right. But yes, it did derive from transformational and ethical leadership styles to come up
I
with
love it.
authentic. Yep.
How often, because this is, I know this is your go-to, and this is
Mhm.
like the one you did your dissertation on. How often do you still want to learn about all the different learning leadership styles and just kind of like it's almost like for me, I love learning about all the different leadership styles. I'm actually right now reading how to how to make friends and influence others by Dale Carney. You heard that book?
Ooh, yes,
One of the
nice.
and it was, like, written, like, in like, over 80 years ago, and it's probably a little bit of it's outdated, but a little of it is actually still applicable, and I think there's a portion of just consuming all this and as I said we said a little bit earlier, like, consuming all these different leadership styles and, like, picking out what you think should be applicable to you, but how often do you still kinda, like, read and research other leadership styles just to kinda reaffirm your authentic leadership or just kinda get see what else is being discussed out there?
Yes, absolutely. So, in working on my doctorate in organizational leadership, that was actually part of the program is you had to learn about other
Mm,
leadership styles. So, of course, you had to learn about other leadership styles, and then you had to focus in and figure out what you were going to write your dissertation on. So,
mhm,
absolutely, yes, I have researched and looked at the many different leadership styles, and I still continue to, participate in different leadership organizations and
mhm,
conferences, and also trade magazines. So definitely, staying up to date on the current leadership trends is important. And you're right; it is important to know where we've been and then to know where we're going. But I am, things are changing daily. There's all kinds of things, and I'm always trying to stay on top of the latest. But I just think, not enough people know about authentic leadership. And it's
mhm,
so important to get that information out there, especially when in terms of staff performance.
mhm,
And when you're seeing performance issues, it is important to hold staff accountable. But then it's also a chance to take a look at the leadership style to see what's going on there because the leader sets the tone and see if that type of leadership style has anything to do with the performance issues. And sometimes it does.
So I'm going way back. I'm jumping all over the place. You're getting your background in communication. You're working in journalism and public relations. What made you gravitate to getting, your doctorate in a leadership, organizational leadership, as opposed to just continuing in your, doctoral journey with communication?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, and that's something that I toyed with. That was not an easy decision. So yes, I got my bachelor's in journalism and mass communications, and I was a broadcast reporter and anchor. And then when I left broadcasting and went into public relations and communications, I said, you know what? I have education being in front of the camera. Now let me go back to school and get my master's in not being in front of the camera,
Mhm.
more on the communication side. So that's when I went and got my master's in communications, which was wonderful and so enlightening. And then I began to move into management, okay, managing teams. And then that's when I said, okay, I want to go back and get my doctorate in organizational leadership because I am interested, in moving up the leadership ladder and I want to understand fully how teams work, managing and leading teams, and how effective and successful teams work. And that is the kind of learning that took place in my program for my doctorate. And you're doing research and you're becoming an expert in this. And so I did think about it, should I get my doctorate in communications? But, I had my master's in communications and I wanted to go into leadership. So it's important to be versatile. And so I knew that I wanted to climb the ladder in terms of leadership. And so that's when I went, and it has been eye opening. I mean, you really learn a lot. I mean, I had 20 years in communications as an anchor and reporter, and got my master's in communications. And so I was like, you know what? Let me make myself more versatile. I got the communications down packed. What do they say? It's in my DNA. Let me move and learn more on the leadership scale. And that was a great idea. That was a wonderful idea, which has helped my career tremendously. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say anything. I got an undergrad in history, a master's in counseling, and I'm getting a PhD in communication. So I'm all over the place. So I can't, pivoting, and I love the interdisciplinary part. And I wouldn't trade any different. I would always study history again. I'd always get my master's in counseling. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. So it's always
It's
different.
great. It's great to be versatile. It really is. It is great to be versatile, and there's nothing that says you have to,
Yeah,
continue on. And one of the things I thought about, if I did get, a PhD in communications, I guess you could teach with that. But I can teach now. I can still teach. So when you just started looking at it and weighing it, I really wanted that knowledge in leadership.
I love it. So, I think, we're getting close. So we're going to jump into my next segment of my show. If you listened before, called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. Um, you want to go first? I go first.
You go first, because I got to tell you, I'm not familiar with this, but you go first.
All right. So I believe you are a devastating diva of Delta Sigma Theta. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. So I'm going to stay on topic with that. Which famous Delta or Delta uh, hits all these pillars as a authentic leader in your mind? Like,
Oh,
who's
goodness.
someone is like, wow, this is a famous Delta or not? I was like, man, if I wrote a book, I'd have a chapter or a little paragraph about how this person aligns with that.
Oh, that is a really good question. That a lot, hmm, that's a good one. I, mm, I think you might have stumped me. I don't know that aligns with every single one of them.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know. I guess, yeesh, I don't
I
know
got
that.
one.
Okay, go ahead. You go, because I don't. Go ahead.
Well, most recently, I don't think she knows me for too much too, but I'll try to get her on a podcast. So I'm gonna send this to her anyway. Um, just recently, one of your sorors is the first Black woman to Congress, Jennifer McCullen.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Okay.
yes, she's from, and I just been following her from a distance, and I know a lot of people that are affiliated with Virginia state politics. And I'll be honest with you, I've never met her in person. I don't know anything like who she is as as a real like face to face person, but just from what I'm seeing, what I read about her, she just seems very nice, and she seemed like she'd be honest, and she communicates very well. I follow her social media and the things she write about. So shout out to you, Jennifer McCullen. I don't know who you are, but I think you're an authentic leader, and from what I see, you hit all these pillars. So maybe one day I can say that. But I think it's like also I think it goes along with I think authentic leadership is that sometimes people can exude these as a personal brand, and you never
Hmm.
met them, but
Hmm.
just the way they carry themselves with that personal brand publicly, that I feel like I could trust her. I feel like she's open to feedback to the constituents, and I feel like she's actually, I've seen her speak. She's
Hmm.
she's a good public speaker. So I think boom. So that's that. I jumped in for one of your soul roles, but that I think she would be a good
Excellent.
person to use for
Well,
that.
that sounds good. That sounds good. I think that's a great selection. I think that's a great selection. Very good. Very good. All right, I'll take it. Sounds good.
There you go. So give me one. What's my random question?
Okay, your random question is why your PhD in communications? What do you hope to do with that?
I don't know. I mean, I was at a crossroads. I I'll be honest, shout out to all the students. I work with students and I worked a lot with mostly undergrad communication students, but I just was fascinated about what they were studying. And I have a podcast, so I was like, wow, I like media. I like media. And then just over time, I started to connect with the professors of that program because, to work and support them with their career development. So I started to kind of gravitate to them as people, the actual professors that teach classes. And so I'll be honest, a little bit of that was that emotional connection to the students and emotional connection to the faculty members. But then I did my due diligence afterwards. And when I was marginally interested, I started doing informational interviews and talking about the actual research topics that the different professors were talking about, like whether it's reputation management, whether it was interpersonal communication, like just the topics of the classes. And I was like, wow, I really like this. And so at bare minimum, I always tell students, study something that you're marginally interested in, because then you'll get good grade. You'll want to read about it. So that's one. So that was the discipline part. Two, if I want to continue in educational leadership, I think having the word doctor next to my name, it don't matter, right? Like, I'm not saying I want to be president of a university, but just saying like Dr. Washington, who's our current president at Mason, he has a doctorate in engineering. So I think the discipline of having a doctorate elevates you in credibility for even leadership in the educational academic space. Or I could just teach, like you just said, just because I had the word that I could teach. So, and then lastly, if I want to leave higher ed, I could be a subject matter expert and consult. So I felt like the versatility of communication allowed me a lot of different doors and opportunities in the future. And as I said earlier, I was something I was actually interested in as a discipline. Like I'd want to learn about it. I want to read about it. I would want to learn about how it's applicable to, my experience as a Black male. So I thought it was pretty cool. So that's
Excellent.
yeah,
Very
that's
good.
my answer. I mean, honestly, that was kind of the answer I kind of sold to the program when I was like, I know I'm random. I know I'm random, but these are the reasons why I'm interested in your program. I like the professors that you have in your program. I like the students that you're working with. And they actually ask you too, like, what are your career goals? Here's some of my options and my career goals. And I had to use that for my personal statement. So I agree. I really had to, it was a long time coming. This wasn't a rash decision. Like I've been at Mason for 5 years.
Mhm.
And I didn't start thinking about it till maybe 20.
Mhm.
And I took one class non-degree during the pandemic, but I had to drop it because pandemic, right? Like, and but that interest to still learn was still there. And I was like, okay, let me gather myself. I'm not ready to take it at the height of the pandemic. Let me use between 2020 and now to do some research. So I did informational interviews. I asked people, I thought about it, I prayed about it, and I didn't actually apply till, as you can see, last year. So that was still a matter of 2 years in between of me just thinking about it. So it wasn't a rash decision. So
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
very good. Well, you know what? And that's good too. I gotta say too, mine wasn't a rash decision either. I mean, it's a lot of work, sacrifice. And so yeah, it is something that you need to really think about and having a support system. And there's a lot of time and energy and studying and research, and so sometimes you're not going to be able to go to that family event or go here because you got to study or work on your dissertation, or yeah, so yeah, it's a huge commitment, so very good, excellent.
So I know we got a tight window. So this part of the show is called shout outs and plugs. So
Mhm.
shout outs means show love to anyone you want to show love to, mom, friends, anyone. And then plugs, these are particularly the things that you want people to be aware of, whether it's your book, or ways they can connect with you, your social media handles and whatnot. So the stage is set, shout outs and plugs.
All right. Oh, well, I like this. You have a fun podcast. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Shout out to my mom and dad, Thomas and Joanne Johnson, and my brother, Thomas Johnson Jr. So shout out to my family. And then plugs, you can find more information about what I offer, speaking on leadership and communications, consulting, coaching, and my online course on authentic leadership. And I have an online course, Life After News, for journalists that are thinking about leaving the news business and transitioning into a new career. I did it and was successful. And I also help other journalists that want to know how to market their skill sets. So that's all on my website, www.sherriespeaks.com. Check it out. Would love to, speak at an upcoming conference or provide executive coaching or have you enroll in one of my online courses.
Excellent, excellent. So all that will be in the show notes. I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for joining us on this show. It's been a pleasure. I took a lot of notes myself and learned a lot, just like I do with all your webinars and all the things you share. So Positive Filter listeners, please share this episode with a family member or friend. Give a like or rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Sharing these episodes elevated to a family and friend. As I said earlier, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. And so please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund, which is also in the show notes of every episode. I miss you very much. Thank you so much. This is a great podcast. Please, continue to support and have a nice day. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.